I did not believe the fire station would become my grave. People used to see them as symbols of safety, bright red doors waiting for the sound of alarms, for heroes to run out and save the day. But when the world ended, those same doors became locks keeping the monsters outside, and sometimes keeping the truth trapped inside with us. For 30 days, we tried to survive in there. 30 days of smoke-filled skies, of blood on the stairwells, of voices that whispered through the static of emergency radios. We thought the infected were the only danger. We thought fire axes and heavy walls would be enough. But we were wrong, because something else was killing us, something we could not fight with bullets or barricades, a sickness that came with fever, coughing and silence where laughter used to be. It spread faster than the infection, and it did not care if you were strong or careful. I survived those 30 days, but I wish I had not. What we saw inside that fire station will haunt me longer than the teeth of the dead ever could. And if you are listening now, remember this. Survival does not mean safety. Sometimes the walls you build to protect yourself are the same ones that keep you trapped with the nightmare. What really happened on the 12th night proved the infection was never our biggest enemy. The city was not burning in silence. It screamed. Sirens bled into the night, overlapping with the low roar of flames devouring entire blocks. Windows shattered in the distance, followed by the metallic echo of gunfire that grew weaker each hour. Every street we crossed looked less like a place where people had lived and more like a battlefield that had already been lost. There were 5 of us when we reached the fire station. A medic who had worked in the local hospital. A man who never told us his name, but carried a crowbar and a stair that could cut through concrete. A kid, maybe 15 at most, who still smelled of smoke from the house he had fled. Alice, the only one who kept her voice steady when the rest of us faltered. And me, we chose the fire station because it looked solid. Its tall walls and reinforced garage doors gave us hope that maybe we could outlast what was happening outside. The streets were filled with infected already, their shuffling bodies dragging shadows across the streetlights. But the station stood untouched, as if waiting for survivors like us. Inside, the air was stale. The hallways smelled of sweat, smoke, and something older that I could not name. Firefighter gear still hung on the walls, helmets lined up neatly, jackets folded over chairs, a calendar with cheerful slogans about teamwork. But there were no firefighters, no voices, no bodies either, at least not yet. It was Alice who found the first sign that something was wrong. In the locker room, one of the doors had been bent like someone had tried to claw their way out from inside. The paint was streaked with blood. Not dried blood that had been there for weeks, fresh. The kind that still glistened under the flickering light. We told ourselves it could have been from an injured survivor. That someone had broken in, used the place as shelter, and moved on. But as the night dragged on, and the silence inside the station grew heavier, we all started to wonder if that explanation was nothing more than comfort. The medic kept whispering about the beds in the sleeping quarters, how some were still warm. The nameless man swore he heard footsteps in the garage when none of us were there. And the kid, his eyes were too wide for someone his age. He said he saw shadows moving in the stairwell even when we all stood together. We locked the doors that night, piling furniture against every entrance we could find. The fire station was ours now, or so we thought, but the truth revealed itself by morning. Because we were not the first to use that station as a refuge. Someone had already been living there, and maybe they still were. The first morning inside the fire station did not feel like safety. It felt like prison walls built out of smoke and ash. We spent the hours after sunrise dragging furniture across the concrete floors, boarding up the doors, and nailing shut the shattered windows with broken pieces of shelving. Every slam of the hammer echoed like a gunshot, reminding us that silence outside had not lasted forever. There were 6 of us then. Harris, the firefighter, who naturally became our leader. His voice carried a calm authority, even when his hands trembled from exhaustion. Marla, a former EMT who had the skill to patch up wounds with nothing but strips of cloth and a steady hand. Ethan, the youngest, barely 13, quiet most of the time, but his eyes watched everything. Then there was Dale, the cynic, who complained more than he helped, though his instincts were sharp when fear did not paralyze him. I counted myself among them, and there was one more, an older man whose name none of us truly knew, a drifter who had slipped into the station on that chaotic first night. He kept to the shadows, muttering prayers under his breath. The building itself was a graveyard of memories. Equipment lockers lined the walls, their doors bent from hurried hands. In one of them, I found something that chilled me more than the moans outside. The locker door was smeared with a dark stain. Blood, half-dried, brushed in frantic streaks across the metal. Inside sat a battered notebook, its pages curled from heat and water damage. The handwriting belonged to one of the firemen who had lived, and likely died here, when the world first fell apart. The entries started simple, notes about calls, about smoke in the city, about strange reports of violent patients that kept arriving in the same neighborhoods. But as the pages went on, the words turned frantic, scribbled in shaking hands with ink pressed deep into the paper, as though force could hold back fear. I flipped through, and one line made the blood in my veins freeze. It was written 3 times across a torn page, as if the man who wrote it wanted to scream the warning to anyone who came after. Do not trust the ones who cough. I closed the book quickly, but the words stayed with me. Even now, years later, they still follow me into sleep. The first 7 days inside the fire station stretched longer than any month I had ever lived. We built a routine, because routine was the only thing that could hold the madness outside at bay. At dawn, Harris walked the perimeter, checking every barricade for weak points. Marla boiled what little water we could salvage from broken pipes and filled it into cracked plastic bottles, while Dale scoured the supply closet for anything edible. Most days we sat around the stove eating cold beans straight from the can, pretending it was dinner. The fire station became a machine that we tried to keep running. Ethan was tasked with stacking supplies, the boy moving silently from one corner to another, his thin frame carrying more than his share of weight. The old drifter spent hours praying in the corner of the garage, rocking back and forth, whispering names none of us knew. His words unnerved me, but nobody had the strength to challenge him. By the 3rd day, the moans outside grew louder. At first they came in waves, rising at night, fading with the sunrise. But as the week dragged on, the infected began to test us. Their fists slammed against boarded windows, their nails scratched against the steel doors, and sometimes in the silence of midnight, we heard the sound of one breathing against the barricade, slow and steady, as though it knew we were listening. Harris ordered 2 of us to keep watch at all times. Sleep became fractured, broken into hours stolen between shifts. Tension bled into every interaction. Dale argued constantly, saying the barricades would not hold. Marla snapped back, reminding him that panic was more dangerous than hunger. Harris tried to mediate, but even his voice lost some of its weight when the noises outside rattled the glass panes. Then came the sickness. It started small, almost invisible. A cough here, a shiver there. Marla insisted it was exhaustion, that the cold nights on concrete floors had taken their toll. But by the 5th day, I noticed sweat soaking through Dale's shirt even in the chill air. Ethan shivered beneath 2 blankets, his lips pale, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. The old drifter stopped praying altogether and simply lay curled on the floor, his breath shallow, his skin burning to the touch. We checked their arms, their legs, their necks. No bites, no wounds, nothing that should have explained the fever spreading through them. By the 7th day, 3 of us were burning up, their bodies trembling with a sickness none of us could name. And the worst part was the truth that gnawed in the back of my mind. None of them had been bitten. We thought the infected outside were the only threat. We were wrong. By the 8th day, the coughing grew violent. Dale hacked until blood speckled his lips, while Ethan could barely lift his head. Marla boiled more water, muttering that maybe the pipes had been tainted. Harris snapped back that it was starvation, that weak bodies gave in quickly when pushed too far. But in the silence that followed, I saw doubt even in his eyes. We argued for hours. Was it the food, the water, the cold, or something worse, something we did not yet understand? Nobody dared say the word second virus, but the thought hung in the air like smoke. Fear spread faster than the illness. Dale accused Marla of hiding medicine. Marla swore she had given him everything she found. The boy Ethan, barely strong enough to whisper, muttered that maybe one of us had brought it inside on purpose. Even Harris, the man we trusted to keep us grounded, slammed his fist against the table when the old drifter laughed through his fever and said, "This sickness was waiting for us all along." I watched them turn on each other, voices cracking, hands trembling as if ready to reach for knives. It was not just hunger that gnawed at us anymore. It was paranoia. Every cough was a threat. Every bead of sweat looked like proof. I caught myself stepping back when Marla brushed past me, afraid of something I could not even name. On the 10th night, the fever claimed its first life. The old drifter's breath slowed, his muttering stopped, and then he was still. We sat in silence, staring at the body, the weight of failure crushing us all. Harris whispered a prayer before we wrapped him in a tarp and dragged him to the corner of the garage. There was no strength left for digging graves. For a moment I thought the worst was over. At least the sickness would not torment him anymore. But then the sound came, a rasp, low and broken, echoing in the dark. The drifter's body twitched beneath the tarp. His arms clawed upward, the plastic stretching as though something inside wanted out. We froze, too terrified to move, as his head jerked violently and his teeth tore through the fabric. He should not have risen. He had no bite, no wound, no reason to come back, and yet he did. When his eyes found us, they were not cloudy like the others outside. They burned with a sick hunger, and his movements were wrong, too fast, too sharp. The first one who died without a bite came back anyway. And he was faster than the others. The nights became something else entirely. During the day, the infected moved slowly, wandering aimlessly like shadows without purpose. But when the sun went down, it felt as if they remembered what they once were. Their movements sharpened, their growls carried further, and their hunger seemed endless. We learned quickly that the fire station was never truly silent. The wind creaked through the metal shutters, the building groaned under its own weight, and every so often the unmistakable scrape of nails dragged along the outside walls. At first it was just one or two. By the third night, dozens gathered. By the 6th, they had become a crowd, testing every door, every boarded window, every crack in our defenses. We thought burning the corpses of the sick would keep us safe, a way to purify the air and prevent further spread of the fever. Instead, the smell traveled through the night like a beacon. That was the mistake that doomed us. The horde came in waves, pressing against the garage doors, their fists pounding against the steel until the walls shook. Their guttural moans swelled together into something that felt almost like chanting. We sat inside, every muscle tense, gripping whatever weapons we could find. Guns would have been suicide, too loud, too final. Instead, we used axes, extinguishers, crowbars, tools meant to save lives now twisted into instruments to preserve our own. The first breach happened at the side window. A pane cracked, then shattered, and a pair of hands clawed their way inside. We swarmed, hacking and smashing until the bodies slumped, but each kill only seemed to draw more. Their blood sprayed across the walls, and the smell of iron clung to our clothes. We moved like ghosts, striking in silence, knowing that one loud mistake could bring the rest crashing in at once. Every swing drained our strength. Every scream we swallowed clawed at our sanity. The station was supposed to be safety, but that night it felt like a coffin with thin walls. We killed and pushed them back again and again, but no matter how many fell, more came. Their faces pressed against the windows, teeth snapping inches from the glass, and then in the chaos, something far worse than the horde revealed itself. We heard the grinding of metal, the shriek of hinges swinging wide. The back gate. It was not broken from the outside. It had been unlocked from within. That was the night we realized the dead were not our only enemy inside the fire station. When the back gate clanged open that night, the infected surged forward like water breaking through a dam. We fought like animals, dragging tables and lockers to block the breach, swinging until our arms burned, until the horde was finally pushed back into the dark. But when the silence returned, it was not relief that filled the room. It was suspicion. We stood in a circle, blood on our hands, the smell of rot clinging to our lungs. The gate had not been broken. The lock had not been forced. Someone inside had done it. Eyes shifted across the faces lit by flickering lantern light. The medic shook her head, whispering that it could not have been any of us. The kid clung to her sleeve, terrified. And then there was the cynic, leaning against the wall, his hands trembling not from exhaustion but guilt. "I did it," he said, voice cracking. "I opened the gate." For a moment no one spoke. The words hung in the air like smoke. He explained that he could not take it anymore. The hunger, the sickness, the walls closing in every night. He had heard rumors before everything collapsed. Whispers of evacuation centers still holding out. He thought if he could slip away in the dark, maybe he could find them. But fear took him, and when the dead poured in, he froze. He had doomed us all for a chance at his own escape. The leader's face hardened into stone. You put all of us at risk. You nearly killed the child, the group erupted. One shouted for his exile, to throw him to the infected and let fate decide. Another demanded they kill him now before he betrayed them again. The medic begged for mercy, her voice shaking, reminding everyone that fear twists people into mistakes they cannot take back. The cynic fell to his knees, sobbing, swearing he would never try again, that he would do anything to make it right. His words sounded hollow, like a broken bell. The air inside the fire station grew heavier than the night outside. Trust was gone. Even if we kept him alive, he would never be one of us again, and yet killing him would mean becoming something darker than the creatures clawing at our walls. We argued until our voices cracked, until our throats felt like they were burning. But in the end, no decision came. Fate made the choice for us, because before we could decide his punishment, the radios crackled to life. A voice we were never meant to hear whispered through the static. The message that night did not come from survivors. It came from someone watching us. The radio hissed with static, the kind that usually meant dead air. But then, underneath the crackle, a voice broke through. Low, urgent trembling. Not a civilian's voice, but clipped and controlled like someone trained to follow orders. This is Echo 9. Repeat, this is Echo 9. Survivors do not respond. Do not transmit back. We are compromised. The room fell into silence. No one breathed. We gathered closer, straining to hear every distorted syllable. The voice continued, words bleeding in and out of static. The outbreak is not singular. Secondary pathogen confirmed. Not transmitted by bites. Spreads airborne, flu-like. High mortality. Symptoms include fever, disorientation, hemorrhaging. Do not admit coughing personnel into safe zones. The medic's face went pale. She remembered the fevers, the coughing fits that had begun inside our own walls. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. The leader whispered, "They knew. They always knew." The voice on the radio grew more frantic, as if the speaker was defying someone listening over his shoulder. Containment measures were never for the dead. Fire stations, schools, community shelters, all designed as intake points. You are not safe there. You were never safe there. They are quarantine traps. My stomach twisted. I thought about the heavy steel doors of the station, the boarded windows, the way it had almost seemed built for us to seal ourselves in. A fortress, we thought, but what if it was never meant to keep the dead out? What if it was meant to keep the sick in? The cynic started to laugh, high and broken, muttering, "We walked right into it. They locked us in their cage and we thanked them for it." The kid covered her ears. The medic tried to soothe her, though her own hands were shaking. The voice returned, weaker now. Gunfire popped in the distance, faint but real, carried across the signal like ghosts of a battlefield. If anyone hears this, burn your dead. Stay away from the red zones. The second pathogen. It is worse than the first. We cannot... The words cut off with a harsh crack of static. Then for a few seconds there was nothing but silence, and then it came, screams, soldiers shouting, orders breaking down into chaos. The rattling bursts of automatic rifles. A roar, not human, not animal, something else entirely. Before the transmission ended abruptly, the room around me was frozen in horror. No one moved. The broadcast ended with one last detail, coordinates etched into our minds. The location of something we were never supposed to find. The fire station, once our fortress, had begun to feel like a coffin. The shelves where we stacked our cans were bare now. Water was rationed in sips, each swallow scraping the throat like sand. Even the child, who once found games in shadows and made forts out of blankets, had grown silent. His eyes followed every movement, too tired to speak, too aware of how close the end really was. The sickness was spreading faster than we could hide it. It was no longer just coughs or fever. It was the weight in our limbs, the way skin grew pale and damp, the way our thoughts turned foggy. Every cough made heads snap. Every sneeze made hands grip weapons tighter. Nobody knew if it was truly the second virus or just starvation, but we all felt it creeping inside us. The walls, which had kept us alive, finally betrayed us. It began with the windows rattling under unseen fists. Then the sound of wood cracking, metal groaning. They were inside the outer bays, swarming the garage floor where fire trucks once stood. The smell of rot pushed through every crack. And then the flames, our own torches, our own desperate attempt to drive them back, licked across the walls. The fire station turned into a furnace of chaos. The survivors split. Some screamed for escape, arguing that staying was suicide. Others claimed the streets were death itself, that outside was nothing but endless hunger. The leader shouted until his voice broke, trying to hold the group together, but the sound of steel doors bending and glass shattering drowned him out. No one trusted anyone. No one believed in survival. Only raw panic remained, and then the final choice. We could stay and burn or run and face the unknown. We chose to run, but the streets outside were worse than anything inside. We ran through smoke and fire, choking on ash as the station collapsed behind us. The night sky glowed orange, every shadow moving like an enemy. Doors burst, windows shattered, and the horde poured through like water breaking a dam. I don't remember who fell first. The medic, maybe, or the cynic. Their screams blurred into the crackle of flames and the thunder of footsteps. We scattered, stumbling over each other, cut apart by the tide. They pulled people down in seconds, the wet tearing of flesh swallowed by the roar of hundreds more. I was struck, clawed across the leg. My body betrayed me, slowing with every step. Blood trailed behind me like a beacon. But I clutched the antibiotics to my chest, the last fragile hope meant for Alice. My reason to keep moving. My reason to live. We turned a corner, found the street worse than the station. Cars overturned, glass glittering like teeth. Figures shambled from alleys, from windows, from sewer grates. The city was alive with death. We were surrounded before we even realized. My rifle was empty. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the pistol. One magazine. One bullet left. The thought lingered. End it myself before they could tear me apart. It would be faster, cleaner. But when I raised the gun, I didn't point it at my head. I thought of Alice, her laugh, her hand in mine. The promise that I'd come back no matter what it took. If this was my end, I wouldn't meet it in fear. I would meet it in love. The swarm closed in. I pulled the trigger, not for myself, but for the first thing that came too close. The blast echoed, then silence, then the rush of bodies. As they dragged me down, I felt no terror, only warmth, only the memory of her face. The last thing I carried into the dark was not fear, but love.